The Dame with a Goat's Foot, inspired by Paul Arago's painting of the same name. The two-string banjo plays a theme to our ageing, old soaks. We sit and talk out the weather, our fortunes and the price of youth. We sit in worn frills and garters, holding on to our daughters and granddaughters, who sleep unhampered by our laments, our songs of love and folly, of men who carried us away on the back of goats to dance in castles and dine on lizards and mint tea, how we in our prime, bold in baubles and bustiers, did battle with taxidermists, tax collectors and our husbands.
Hello and welcome to Woman Up, the podcast series by Desperate Art Wives. I'm Susan Merrick, and you've just heard a poem by our guest today, Amanda Holliday. Amanda has studied fine art and drama direction. She's an artist and a poet, and her work spans 3 decades. She's had poetry widely published, and I'm really excited that she's here today. Hello, Amanda.
Hello.
Thank you for your poem. Could you explain a bit to our listeners what you mean by, is it the term narrative drawings, or are these your art poems? Are those 2 different things that you work with, or...?
Well, I came to poetry through art. You know, I studied fine art, as you said, at Wimbledon back in the 80s. And it was a kind of circuitous route that took me through to poetry. You know, I had my daughter along the way. I lived in South Africa for 10 years. And I started writing poems quite recently, in around 2017, and they were inspired by art. I think it's because your life changes as you have a family, as you know, and you have to adapt your art making. So I had been working on very large drawings, and then they started getting smaller. And I think that I found poetry was sort of like, you know, a kind of way of working anywhere, really, on the kitchen table. And, you know, that kind of whole vast room of imaginings you have as an artist, you can transport it anywhere as a poet. So you can work on the tube. And so it was another way of accessing all the kind of ideas that I've been exploring as an artist. And, of course, I've always loved Paula Arago. She's a, you know, wonderful artist, as you know, very, very interesting in terms of her own life story and her politics and all the other things. And this is a painting that fascinated me, and I found it came very easily. I actually sent Paula Arago this book when it was published, so you know, I hope she enjoyed the poems too. But I found that at least 3 or 4 of her works have inspired poems. I find that with certain artists, they're particularly, you know, they speak to me. It's about what the art is often saying to me. I find that's what the poetry does.
So is that your process then? Do you generally, is it that artwork that you come across, you then, you recognise whether it's going to do something for you in terms of creating a poem? And is it only paintings and kind of print images, or do you get that from other kind of other forms of artwork as well?
Yes, it is mainly figurative work, because my own work was figurative and kind of storytelling. There's a form of poetry called ekphrasis, which comes from the Greek word like speaking out. And it is about what the art says to me. But then I find the more I kind of write these types of poems, the kind of deeper you go into the artwork. So it is, you know, I find that also when I'm reading them out, it's about what they say to the audience as well. Like it's about ways of seeing and exploring my own reading of the picture, but hopefully touching other people with this interpretation. You know, I don't think it's necessarily the only interpretation, and not necessarily what the artists, you know, wanted to say with the picture. So it's an interpretation, really. But yes, I do feel that her work, like with a lot of other women speaks to me, as a woman, as a mother. So,
would you read another poem for us, please, Amanda?
okay, I'll read another one that's inspired by Paula Rego. And I've called the poem The Angel, if I can find it. And it's inspired by her painting On the Way to Egypt. The donkey was stubborn, and Mary dug her heels into its side. But the mule was tired of walking, and now the baby was crying. Fat little baby, all swaddled and plumpy. And Mary jiggled him and tickled him and put him to her breast, and still he was teary. And Joseph had walked off to lay a brick wall and have his hair styled into a flick. God damn it, men. But Mary bit her tongue and sent a quiet prayer up to the sky. Someone come and help. And the angel swooped down almost straight away, and at first there was a tussle. Mary held on. He's just a few weeks old. Don't take him to heaven yet. And the angel, calm and firm, said she'd take the baby to the pyramids to see the Pope and maybe some art, then bring him back. And Mary was relieved she'd see her son again and thank the winged lady before she trotted on.
Wow. That's so emotive and hilarious all in one go.
And it's all about what it's about, don't you? Those times when you think, oh my gosh, I can't cope, that kind of thing. So it was, that's what the actual painting conjured in me. It's all about a particular moment, where this angel is swooping down and she seems to be grabbing the child and she wants to give it to her, but then she doesn't want to. That whole idea of entrusting, like sometimes when you might have to entrust your child or baby with somebody and you don't quite know whether you should, and sort of, so there was a lot there.
And they're being desperate for a rest. I've got from my research that you, in 1989, began a series called The Hum of History.
Yes, that's right.
Could you tell me about that, please, what that was?
Yes, that was a very large-scale series of drawings on brown paper, because I loved working on brown paper, partly because it kind of represented my skin colour in so many ways, but also I love the feel of it and, that kind of butcher's wrapping paper and stuff. So I started this huge series of drawings. Then, when I was living in East Dulwich in a kind of short life housing or a squat and had big wall space, and one of the first drawings was of Margaret Thatcher embalmed and mummified, So that was one of the first. And then, I thought I had this idea, I had very grand ideas then. Oh, I'm going to do this whole series that goes on forever, tell the story of the world, So I had all these kind of big ideas, and I think I stopped at about 3. And then I kind of resumed it, that captured my imagination when I was living in South Africa. Because when I was in South Africa, I was in this marriage and I wasn't happy and I wanted to get out of it, the marriage. And I kind of started drawing again, these huge drawings, as a kind of way of, bringing myself, to picturing what I could do with my life. And my daughter was in it. So there's always this woman striding out the picture, holding a daughter like this. So I kind of started doing this. And I did about must have been 5 or 6 of these huge drawings in South Africa. And then, it worked, you see. So I found myself back in the UK eventually, kind of worked through all the things I needed to do.
Amazing. Am I right in thinking you were also working as a script writer while you were out in South Africa?
Yes. I was doing kind of factual television and educational arts programming. I did a series for the Parliamentary Millennium Project on ways of seeing, which was about self-advocacy for young South African children, and sort of there's a kind of looked at things like focus, perspective, quite simple terms, but then exploring them in kind of both literal and metaphorical ways, and with a group of children, and it was kind of on. I think they should probably show me about 10 or 15 times on the TV there, It was shown so many times. So that was interesting. And I also did some storytelling programs for young children, like African storytelling, programs. Yeah. So that was a kind of, going in a different direction there. It wasn't necessarily my own stories, or, you know, the kind of, there's always this kind of dilemma as an artist into things you want to do and say and things that you have to do, you know, that whole, you know about that.
When you need to earn some money.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So you, I asked about narrative drawings and art poems earlier.
Yeah.
And I know that the poems that you're reading now are fairly new to your practice the last few years, and that's what you call the art poems or art poetry. You mentioned in older work, in your older practice, narrative drawings. What exactly do you mean by that? You've described some of the drawings that you've done, but when you call it a narrative drawing, just describe that a bit for me.
For me, a narrative drawing is a drawing that can tell a story that has got sort of lots of different elements to it that you don't necessarily know what it says, but you kind of look into it. Like my narrative drawings, there's a lot going on. Like I would say, a lot of Paula Rego's work, there's a lot going on. There's different elements in different parts, you know, things happening in corners, people walking off there. It's almost like there's segments of it, you know, things going on. You feel that different, you know, it's if you could follow it through, there's a story where all the parts link together somehow. So that's what I feel. Or that you feel that it's the beginning. You want to see what happens next. Because I have, you know, worked as a scriptwriter and filmmaker, I feel that this is, you know, everything sort of, it starts becoming the same type of art for me. So I just kind of take filmmaking into poetry and into art. So for me, art was like a piece of the story. You know, so that's what I mean, really, by these figuratives. They were a piece of the story. I wanted people to always wonder, like I did the series after my marriage ended on the bride who ate her husband. I called it that. Yes. And it makes everybody laugh. And I had the little man on the plate and everything, you know, these hands and stuff and peas. But, you know, exactly, just saying that makes people laugh. And it's a kind of the story. You think, oh, what happened there? You know, people start thinking, well, what happened? You know, why, who, what, you know, and how, you know. So that's what I mean. It sort of like offers up questions, a kind of, that kind of narrative.
That totally makes sense with this continuum of your work, that you started with the drawings making a narrative, and then you've come kind of full circle, I guess, to now creating that narrative from those images of other people's. You've mentioned Paula Rego a few times, obviously a big inspiration to you. Who else, artist-wise, do you find yourself getting drawn into more regularly, I guess?
Well, there's a Zimbabwean woman who works mainly with screen print, and her name's Virginia Chihota, and I've written about 2 or 3 poems inspired by her works, and you know, they're kind of quite dark works. There's artists Donald Rodney, Yinka Shonibare, a lot of black artists. There's Zanele Moholi, who's going to have a big show at Tate Modern later this year, written a kind of a poem called Hat, because she uses all these kind of objects on her head. So, you know, one of those really inspired me. Different things, really. Sometimes it's quite quirky. I've also found myself inspired by things that happen as well to art. Like there was a case of some man falling down one of Anish Kapoor's holes, and I found that quite funny. So I kind of wrote a scenario around that. So, you know, it's not necessarily the artwork. Sometimes it's the kind of experience of, of visitors in the gallery or people, you know, viewing the artwork.
Yeah. Could you read us another poem, please, Amanda?
All right, I'll read you a darker one now, and this one is inspired by Virginia Chihota's screen print called Testimony with Empty Hands. And I put with homage to Gabriel Garcia Marquez here, because there's a kind of imagery that comes from one of his novels. Our mother's blood seeped down the street from where she was stabbed 11 times through the heart, down the gutters, to our school, and under the door, and into the room where we sat at our desks, empty-handed, reaching for answers.
Wow. So you mentioned that I can hear as well that your poetry might potentially bring in a darkness from a subject that you see, or it might translate some humour. What is important to you, either a bit in your work, but also to you as a person? What drives you? What's your passions?
Gosh, that's a big question, really. Storytelling drives me, touching people, making people feel, really, and saying things that I think are important, that other people can also explore with me through the poetry. Like, we'll see that in the last poem, which the one I'm going to save to the end, which is about my mother, who was actually a poet herself. So it's even more poignant. But she's in a care home at the moment, and no longer probably able to recognise me anymore. So that's the final poem I'm going to talk to you. But it's I don't know. Poetry can be about all, for all these different moments in life, but it can also be about the everyday. So I don't know. Really,
It is a big question. It's unfair. Maybe which work, and I mean your work, which work gives you most pleasure?
I do enjoy writing poetry, especially when I do something that I feel is good, and it's a very precise way of working, being a poet. You really have to think of exactly the right words, and it's kind of skimming back. It's a very different sort of process to art, which is often about working things through and taking things away. I mean, poetry can be like that, but it's more about precision, like a kind of surgeon's type of precision. You can't, it's got to work type of thing. But I love making art. I think art is a more kind of joyous, for me, experience, like painting or collaging, or, you can just get totally carried away with that pasting and the making and the doing of it,
How did you begin your work as an artist? And you've mentioned that you went to Wimbledon College of Fine Art. What was your upbringing? Did you have art in your life from a young age?
Well, I was born in Sierra Leone. My dad is from Sierra Leone. My mum is English, and my mum left my dad when I was 5 and brought me and my sister over, and we went to live in the north of England. And my mum worked in all sorts of jobs, and she worked as a bus conductor, and she worked as a teacher, and so the question is, I'm supposed to be going around to how did I have art? Oh, my mum was she was even though we never had any money, she always bought us books when we were younger, me and my sister. So she had, and she was doing her own writing in part-time, and became, first of all, she published some children's books, and then later on she became a poet. So I feel like in a lot of ways I feel sometimes my life is mimicking my mother's, and I wonder, if that's anything that you think about, how much of our lives are our mother's lives, and there's a part of me that wants to resist that, that whole thing, really, especially in terms of like going out I went to Cape Town and came back, and being a single parent and so forth, So, yeah, I don't want to live my mother's life.
This, I think, would be a nice point to have another poem, if that's okay, Amanda.
All right, okay. I shall read you one now, which is I did an MA last year in poetry at the University of East Anglia, and this is the anthology that's published of all the MA writers, so I'm going to read you one from there. And this was based on a real story. It's called The Mother Who Left Her Baby for the Queen. The baby cried very little. He had been home 2 days, milk in her breast 1 feed. The house was hollow. She wrapped him in brown paper inside a fleece. 5 a.m. at the bus stop, waiting. London was still. In Pall Mall, taxis churred on tarmac. Street lamps blinked. At Buckingham Palace gate, she laid him down and walked away. He would stride back one day with brass bands blasting, jet planes icing the sky in red and blue plumes, a million plastic flags fanning the new king, her baby grown so tall. I saw her on the bus today, same face, pale and yellow as 20 years ago, splashed across the papers.
Wow. What was your inspiration for that one?
Well, I actually lived on a street in Brockley as this girl. I don't know whether you're going to have to edit any of this bit out, but as this girl. And I remember going to the newsagents one day, and there were all these cars parked in the street. And I said, "Oh, why are all these cars?" And they said, "Oh, it's journalists. You know, the girl the mother who just left a baby at Buckingham Palace is her. You know, she lives in this street." So, and I realised who she was. You know,
like to share with us in terms of what you've got coming up, what you're doing at the moment.
Well, I'm going to carry on with poetry and art simultaneously. Actually, I would like to find a way of bringing the two together, really. So that's probably what I'm going to be exploring. Finding a way of, combining maybe performing poetry and artwork. That would be a nice development, I think. So,
yeah, I really enjoyed seeing when you were at the Filia conference, in the room that Jane Hellings had curated. I really enjoyed seeing you perform there with the imagery behind you. That was a really strong way of performing the pieces.
Yeah, I really like doing that. I've done that several times, and It also makes the art very accessible to people who wouldn't necessarily, look at it in these kind of ways. That's what I enjoy the most about it. It's not often I've spoken to like women audiences or not art audiences at all. So it's good. It's a nice feeling, that you're bringing all this meaning out for people.
I think it would make a really powerful workshop program, because the way that you interpret the paintings, the way that you interpret the images in artwork, does make it more accessible. It does make it, it gives it a story which can make it relatable, which I think then can make it open to a wider audience. I think you should consider that.
Right, thank you.
Amanda, how did you come to start writing?
Recently, I think I was inspired by paintings, but I was actually, I was kind of good at English at school, but I was kind of pushed towards art always. And I think that kind of left me with the idea that I was better at art than I was at English, these kind of things, whereas actually it was probably the other way around when I think back, I was kind of got the art prizes and things. And I don't know, it's these kind of subtle little things that you take away with you from childhood, And it's only recently that I think, I should have done this earlier. And also, I don't know, I was two sisters, and my sister was, always very clever, and I didn't want to do what she'd done at studying, so I had to be different. So I did art, and I did, she'd done English, so I couldn't do English and all those kind of things. So I had to kind of take the circuitous route through life to find what I really wanted to do, So I suppose it's worth looking that up in siblings, where there's a bit of a rivalry, and making sure it doesn't stop one or other of you from doing what you really want to do.
So in the work that you mentioned before, the wife who ate her husband after you'd separated from your own partner, what kind of work was that? Was that a drawing?
It was a whole series of drawings that was almost like me coming to terms with the end of my marriage and and I had this bride. You know, I think the first picture was sort of like a takeoff of the Goya thing. I had this woman in a wedding dress, like chewing her husband. And then I thought I would make a whole series. So I did this kind of bride with a tiny little husband getting married, and then a kind of dinner plate. I mean, it was kind of jokey in a way, you know, and you know, this little man on a dinner plate. There was something. I mean, it's making you laugh, but there was something about me when I was an artist, just creating all these things. It was kind of, I don't know whether it's therapeutic. It was making me laugh. I was kind of enjoying that whole thing. You know, maybe it was kind of like feminist power. I don't know what it was, but I really enjoyed sort of like putting a little man on a plate with peas and chips next to him, and a knife and fork, and you know. It was an enjoyable thing. I don't know. It's this whole thing about imagination. Again, you can work things out in your imagination. You can do things. You know, you can sort of control your life. It's in your art. You know, so you can tell all these stories to yourself or to other people. You know, that kind of help you. You know, process whatever it is in a way you want to. You know. Tell a story about it, because I mean, you know, when people, it's like you telling you about a cesarean. I had a cesarean. I remember, you know, telling one of my friends, "Oh, I had my daughter by a cesarean." She said, "Oh, poor you." Like this, and I thought, "What? I'm fine. It only took 20 minutes. I was perfectly happy with it," you know. And I feel like so your art, you can tell your story, and I think I wanted to tell a kind of semi-comical story. You know, about this experience. I didn't want to be all kind of gloom and doom, or you know, you don't want to be a victim, or you know, all these kind of things. And art is a way of sort of like presenting your truth, really, you know.
And I think when you present art in that way, when it has come from something quite personal, or from, even if it's not personal, 'cause my work's often quite social, or dealing with social issues that might be quite dark. But I don't always want to delve into just the darkness of it. I want to use some humour.
Yeah.
And I think it makes it more accessible, so you can talk about these subjects more. It's not about making it palatable. It's about making it accessible as an important subject to talk about, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for your time today. Before you finish with the last poem, I'd just like to say thank you very much and goodbye.
Okay, this final poem is called Flat Harry's Nose. My mum is now rice paper, scrunched into a ball on a bed, lined with a plastic sheet, her nose a white beak, eyes wet all the time with no light in them, and her knees peaked. When me and my daughter come into the room, she looks straight through us. This is not my mother. We sing A Frog Who Would a Wooing Go, and she turns away. Someone brings a sherbet drink in a suck cup, asks one of us to give it her. Mum slurps like a bird and smiles. We sing Come Into the Garden, Maud. My daughter cries at the uselessness and runs to the toilet. I carry on singing, looking out of the window. The room is full of pretty things that shine and glow. On the wall, colour shapes, and by her bed a squashed bear who must be 40 years old. When we lived up north, I used to collect for cancer research on the estate. One day I was given a bear for good work. My mum named him Flat Harry, made him one of the family, sent us birthday cards from him. But now his nose has fallen off. My daughter comes out of the toilet, her eyes watery, and I pick up the bear and ask, where has Flat Harry's nose gone? Mother laughs. I ask, how can Flat Harry smell with no nose? My daughter laughs, and I look under the bed for the nose. My mother is still happy. The nurse comes back with another pink drink. I put the bear back in the chair next to the bed. We put our coats on. I say I'm going to find another nose for Flat Harry. We take the train home for 5 hours. When I'm home, I find a leather key fob, cut a circle, put it on the bedside table for next time we visit.
Thank you for listening. I'm Susan Merrick, and this was Woman Up, the podcast series by Desperate Art Wives.